at times to go to different conferences related to transit. And so when you look at DART compared to other transit systems in other major metropolitan areas, how do you see DART stacking up?
So I think DART's an interesting case because our peer agencies, I guess in terms of where they're located in the country or the number of people in our area, we'll get some kind of sister agencies, right? Maybe you look in just Texas and say, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, El Paso, maybe we look at those folks as peers. But we've differentiated ourselves with the kind of commitment that we've given to our rail operations. And so, like I said, we have the longest light rail in the country, and there's not really many people who have light rail in the way that we do. And so our investment there looks a little different from Houston, who has, one kind of really main line, but some other shorter lines. And so we're a little bit different. It's hard for us to really find a great comparison, but in terms of just the general way that we operate as an agency, we certainly are looking to those who are trying to make the same commitment as us as it relates to reinvesting in our bus system. Now, we certainly recognize it as a need for us to take some time and look at how we might revamp the way that we do buses to better help get folks to employment opportunities.
That's cool. So looking across the country, not just in Texas, would you say BART, Bay Area Rapid Transit, may be the most similar to y'all? Or
we certainly got our name from BART. But I think Atlanta is a similar agency. Really got started around the same time as they were getting the Olympics started up and building out their rail system. And BART, Seattle. There are a lot of agencies that have a similar kind of dynamics in terms of bus with some commuter rail built in. I think those are also good comparisons.
Very cool.
We are here with DART board member Jon Killen, who is also a Mustang that Ryan is also, after we get off, is going to have some probably good time memories talking about the good old days. But we want to talk a little bit more I want to get into talking about bus specifically, talk about some of the fare changes that have happened. So hang with us through this break. We'll be right back. Deconstructing Dallas, Shawn Williams, Ryan Trimble. Thanks.
From a baby's first steps to walking your daughter down the aisle, so many of life's precious moments are spent on our feet, and every step you take contributes to a healthier heart. By walking briskly for just 30 minutes a day, you can lower your risk for heart disease and stroke. So join us and take the first step to a healthier, longer life. The American Heart Association. Life is why.
Back, Deconstructing Dallas, Shawn Williams, Ryan Trimble. We are here with Jon Killen from the DART board, also known as DJ Killen. John, I saw you at a Dallas Black Chamber party at the end of December, and you gave me some news that I'm going to say shocked and saddened by, that you are retiring as a DJ. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm gonna use the word retirement right now. I think my wife would prefer for it to be retirement, as it's a more permanent sounding than a brief suspension. But been DJing for 10 years now. Got started while I was at SMU, and while it was great fun, now that I have a 7 and 3-year-old in the mix, they don't really care what time I get home at night. They just know that when the sun's up, they're up. And so in order to protect my sanity and my sleeping, I've decided to take a break from DJing.
And your marriage.
Yeah, to save the marriage, to make sure that she's happy that she was happy with the money that was coming in, not so much the full day Saturdays that I might be going for a wedding.
MJ made a comeback out of retirement.
You never know. I'm hopeful, but I think you got like one more gig lined up, and then DJ Killen is like, that's going to be it for that for me.
Yeah. I figure maybe by the time my son gets to junior high and he wants to be the cool kid in school, I can bring the equipment back out. He can DJ, the first school dance, and then
look at this old stuff my dad used to use.
You had to touch an actual button, Never mind the vinyl.
Just wave your hand and make it happen. Yeah.
Well, back on our conversation with DART, you talked a little bit, or you mentioned about investment in bus. And a lot of the things we hear related to DART is about light rail, and that's something that the agency has touted for years. And I know anytime I looked forward related to DART, it was around light rail. But you talked about opportunities to invest in bus and the bus system. So can you talk about what you found and what you might see as some of the opportunities related to the bus service?
Yeah, well, first, let me just say, as it relates to rail, one of the reasons we focus so heavily on rail is that when we were created as an agency, we produced a rail map that showed folks as they were deciding to invest in DART or not, what the system could look like from a rail perspective. And so with our recent approval of the Cotton Belt and D2, that really completes that early map that we created 35 years ago, showing what the investment might look like. And so as we reach maturity in that plan, we have to recognize what is it that we can do next. And so the buses is kind of the natural place for us to go and say, this is something that one has already been existing with DART, but also carries a ton of our people. And so how can we use the same resources that we have today to better serve those who are riding our bus? And so one of the commitments is that in August of 2019, we're going to have a significant number of new buses that are coming online that we ordered a few years ago. And with that, we're going to couple that by doing a significant change in the frequency at which certain routes run. And so we're trying to create a network of buses that are similar to our light rail. And so, if you go out and find the red line, that it's running 15 minutes during the peak hours, work hours, and then maybe an off peak, it's running every 20 minutes. And so we want to make sure that we can complement that with those corridors that need that from the bus perspective. So you can go out to a bus stop and that it's coming every 15 minutes. And so those are the kind of investments that we're going to make that you'll first start seeing coming online in August. But certainly as much as the board can find additional resources, we want to make those same kind of investments throughout the system.
John, I know when you first came on the board, you had mentioned Cotton Belt and D2. Those were two big issues that the board was looking at. And we talked a little bit about Cotton Belt. D2, of course, is going to be the subway under downtown Dallas. And DART has a history of the first, I guess, subterranean light rail in Texas was City Place Station. So tell us a little bit about D2, where it's going to go, what it's going to do, and how it's going to help the system overall.
Right. So the reason D2 is coming in the first place is that at this point, DART, all of our rail lines kind of converge through downtown, right? So all of them at some point connect through downtown to get to their various endpoints. And because of that, we're really at capacity about how fast that those trains can kind of come through, because they each need to pause and wait as they're coming down Pacific. And so by adding a second alignment, which is what D2 would be, we can reroute some of those rail lines, right? So that way two or three of those can run on one line and the other ones will run on D2. And that'll allow us to go faster in the future. So right now, the fastest that we can send our light rail vehicles is every 15 minutes. But possibly we could get that down to 12 minutes or 10 minutes if we add some more capacity through downtown. Another good reason that we're focusing on D2 and why it needs to get here pretty soon is that in the event of accident downtown, if something shuts down that one line that runs through Pacific, our entire light rail system really comes to a halt because there's no way to get around that. And so it added some additional capacity in terms of our ability to route traffic. The actual location of where the D2 would go is still kind of up in the air. We do have a preferred alignment, and now the issue is we're trying to figure out what the cost is going to be and how we can make sure we're going under whatever happens with 345, whether it's at grade, below grade, or what's happening there, and trying to figure out what the funding mechanisms are that are going to allow us to afford that project. Right now, we're projecting it somewhere in maybe $1.3 billion. That's quite a bit of funds.
That's a big dig.
And the expectation is that hopefully we can find a grant from the federal government. They haven't been too kind at the moment to transit projects, but we're hoping that just like the Cotton Belt, where we're able to get a great deal on a loan, that we're also able to find our way into getting a grant to help push along D2.
You brought up Cotton Belt, and there seemed to be at times consternation around the Cotton Belt. And full transparency, Alameda, we worked for DART even as they were going out doing community meetings related to Cotton Belt in the early stages of a couple years ago. And so, what was your take on Cotton Belt on the line, whether or not people who lived in the area had a good understanding of what was going on? You mentioned how it was kind of in the original plans. Is it still viable from your perspective? I just would love to hear your thoughts.
Certainly viable because we just closed some loans to approve construction on the Cotton Belt. So it's definitely going forward. I think actually I came on board in the middle of the vote for the Cotton Belt. And so City of Dallas had they had a resolution where they said they wanted DART to make sure or at least prioritize and make sure that D2 had a future with DART and that it was going to have secured funding. That led to some turnover on the board right from the City of Dallas. And so I came in the middle of that, not the way I think anyone should really want to walk into that situation because votes need to happen. We have budgets kind of coming up. But either way, I think the reason it was so contentious is because you had the two projects, the Cotton Belt and the D2, and up to that point, we had not gotten full clarity and transparency about how we would be able to fund the two projects. And so the thought was maybe that Cotton Belt might preclude us from being able to do D2. That ended up not being true. Our staff, kudos to them. They did a great job. Our finance team really working to find mechanisms in ways that we would be able to fund both projects without significantly impacting our 20-year financial plan. And so the board ultimately agreed to approve the two projects together, kind of simultaneously saying we'll do one and they'll make sure that the funding is set aside for the other. As far as actually how the construction and where it's going and dealing with neighborhoods and their concerns, that's tough. I mean, this is a situation where, yes, I think anyone who moved whose house maybe was abutting a rail line certainly knew at one point there was a rail line that was there. But if nothing's been on there heavy for some years, I could see that being an issue if all of a sudden you think there's going to be super loud trains coming by every 10 minutes. And so I know DART staff worked really hard with each of those constituents and making sure that we, demonstrated what sound walls would look like and talking about vibration patterns with experts and all those things. And so, ultimately, I think in situations like this, you're never going to have 100% buy-in or okay from different groups. There's always going to be someone that's impacted. But ultimately, I think DART did a great job in the way that we went about our community engagement and the way that we've tried to mitigate any things that are going to happen in different communities. And so I'm proud of the effort that we've taken there.
So, John, what about the fare changes that recently took place? I know you and your board members, as you were looking at different fare changes, wanted to make sure that your customers, especially those customers who, do all that they can to make sure that they can afford to pay for their DART train pass, their bus pass, and I think that was something that you all took a lot of thought and time to make sure that your customers were treated the way that they should be treated. So can you talk about those fare changes that recently took effect?
Yeah, sure. So back in August of 2018, DART increased its fares kind of across the board about 20%. And as you can imagine, I think if any of our light bills or gas bills went up 20%, that would be a huge hit kind of to our budgets. And it, sitting on the other side of the table as a DART board member with fiduciary responsibility, we certainly had to look at why, number one, that was necessary. What caused us to get to a point where a 20% increase would be necessary for us to be financially solvent, as it were. And so the way that we looked at it was we realized that the way our budget had been set up in years prior was that these fare increases were baked in. So the idea was every 5 years we need to increase our budget to take care of things that I think everyone understands. You've got just general inflation that's happening. You've got healthcare costs that are rising at a significant rate and just a bunch of other expenses as a business that we need to take on, including our capital expenses and our debt. And so we certainly had expenses on our side that we needed to make sure that we were raising funds for. I think the problem was that a 20% at one time just really hurts a lot of people. And certainly that caused a lot of folks in the community to come out because they had concerns about how that was going to be affordable for them. The commitment that we asked for from staff and other board members was just to say that after this fare increase takes place, that we're going to continue to study the issue of fares and figure out ways that we can mitigate things like this from happening in the future, these large jumps. And so for the past few months, we've been talking about a couple of ideas, most important of which is the introduction of a low-income fare program